Thank you, Rachel. Thank you all for coming. It's a huge privilege to invite you all and see you all in Barcelona each year. I have 45 minutes to talk to you about how this industry is transforming. We're going to cover a lot of topics. And in my 20 years as an IT market analyst, this presentation will be definitely remembered for one thing. For the first time, this presentation will include politics, and this presentation will include sex. Concentrate. There's excitement coming. We've been running these channels forums since 2007, and while 2007 was a boom year, and we said on stage, you've never had it so good, since then, the dominant theme of my presentation has been the economy, and the number one issue you've talked to us about is the economy. I am delighted to tell you today that going into this Q4 and into 2014, the European economic situation is better than it has been in the last 4 years. It's not great, growth is still slow, but remember we were talking about disasters, the end of the euro, collapse of governments, etc. It hasn't happened. We predicted we would muddle through. We think we have muddled through, and we're now starting to see a significant improvement. Many of you have told us via Candefero that September was your best month for more than 18 months. Which was very encouraging to see, and we remain relatively optimistic about the future of the economy, which means I'm not going to talk any more about the economy today. It's still tough, but it's gradually improving, which is good news for us. But I am going to talk to you about a lot of inflection points inside the industry. I told you that the economy is starting to improve in Europe and also in the United States, slowing a bit in China. We're not seeing the same improvement inside the IT industry, however. Q3 was collectively putting all the big vendors together and averaging up their revenue growth. These are the vendors that supply you in the audience, was actually our worst quarter for a long time. We're expecting the Q3 results, which will come out in the next week or two, to be a little bit better. And unfortunately, the reason for this is the industry is in transition. And although the economy is starting to improve, the traditional IT titans haven't been able to benefit from that. And we'll talk more about that a little later. By breaking out the data into 3 elements, this was quite a surprise for us. So we took all the big vendors and we tried to look at their revenues and assess them by these 3 categories: software, smart devices, infrastructure, and services. We'd have actually expected smart devices, that's PCs and smartphones, originally to be the lowest number. But actually, because of the growth of tablets and because of the growth of smartphones, even though the Wintel PC business has been declining, we did have incredibly strong growth in 2010 and 2011. A lot of that, I have to say, driven by Samsung, Apple, and Google. That has now moderated. The smartphone market has become enormous, and the law of large numbers means it's come down in terms of the performance of the industry. So the smartphone industry is big and can no longer grow at mega growth rates. It will continue to grow at around the 10 to 20% level instead. So that's why the smart device number was high, and it's coming down. And we also see their infrastructure and services has been difficult. And I'm going to talk much more about that later. A bit more optimism inside the software category. I'm going to start by talking about devices, then quickly move on to enterprise IT. For us at Canalys, the tablet is a PC. When we first said that, it was controversial. Now more and more people are adopting our viewpoint. Looking at the overall PC industry this year, including tablets, we see 5.5% unit growth. But you see from this segmentation, 35% of those products are tablets now. And we are predicting in Q4, there'll be more tablets shipped than notebooks for the first time ever. There also probably going to be a huge inventory build-up and a lot of fire sales post-Christmas, which could be a worry. The problem is the tablets' average selling prices are at 100, 200, 300 euros, and it's proving very hard for almost everybody except Apple today to make money from this. So the client devices are moving, but they're in transition towards tablets. There are some other very big changes going on. The network is moving from wired to wireless. 4G is being rolled out around Europe and giving people much more access to bandwidth on the move. Storage is seeing huge growth around flash. Servers from HP and others are starting to ship with ARM-based processors. And in very large data centers, there is competition now in the server market and huge growth from the white boxes. White box ODMs in Taiwan that were focused on notebooks moving into servers and causing price point issues inside the server market. Those are just some of the issues. The growth of all these client devices and you need the data centers to serve them is placing a major challenge on energy. And Europe has a problem with energy. The price of our energy is going up when the price of energy in the US is going down, principally because of the US's adoption. This isn't where I go into politics, but the US adoption of shale gas has seen a crash in gas prices in the US. In Europe, we have a problem. As countries like Germany pull out of nuclear power, we're going to have less access to energy and prices going up. As energy is such an important cost inside the IT industry, Europe is putting itself at a competitive disadvantage. Inside the PC industry, we expect the PC industry to consolidate significantly within the next 12 months. There are too many tier 1 PC vendors in the Wintel world to survive. We expect mergers and acquisitions to happen. Look out for that as a transition. And now, as we move on to this slide, what we have done is join smartphones, PCs, and tablets together to look at the operating system mix. And there is an overwhelming winner. This year, around the world, all devices together, 57% of them will ship on Google Android in all its different versions. Windows falling to 23%, Apple 17%. This is a dramatic transformation in the industry. And although it's always difficult to predict operating systems, we would expect Google to continue gaining market share rapidly. All of the information is pointing in that direction. Apple is under pressure again, like it was 20 years ago when the PC came in with prices underneath the Mac. Now the same is happening with Android on smartphones and tablets, price points below them, a revolution in China around price points. Apple needs to react, and there's no sign they recognize the challenge that they face right now. And Microsoft needs to become desirable again. Windows 8.0 was not well received. Windows Mobile, although a pretty good operating system, hasn't excited consumers. So we're in a world where Google is dominating the client devices. True, it's mainly consumer-led today, but with such dramatic numbers shipping, it's only a matter of time before this becomes the standard in the enterprise too. Be very prepared. It will become an enterprise operating system. So that was talking a little bit about devices. I'm now going to switch around to enterprise IT and talk to you about the transitions we see there. First of all, you see these 4 wonderful companies on the bottom of this slide. The consumer giants, Apple, Facebook, Google, and Amazon, of course. Just highlight, in the last 5 years, these companies together have grown 320% revenue growth. And the problem for our industry is they are not channel friendly. They sell direct whenever they possibly can. Yes, Apple uses the channel where it doesn't have its own stores. It's a reluctant part of the channel. It's quite big, particularly for the distributors, but certainly not friendly. And unfortunately, right now, the companies who are doing really well are not working with your community. That's a problem for each of us. Meanwhile, what we see in the IT channel world is a restructuring. I'm going to talk to you now quickly in bullet point form about all the major vendors you work with. But before I do that, I'm going to bring them all up, and I've told you about the 4 consumer companies growing 320% in the last 5 years. The channel-friendly titans who you work with, looking as a group, in the past 5 years have grown just 15%, essentially flat, including the acquisitions they made. And what we now see in the enterprise IT world is a series of transitions. As each of them struggle for growth in their core businesses, they're all starting to move on each other's territory. And some of the alliances and partnerships that underpinned our industry for many years are starting to change. And it was very difficult to know where to start this slide, but we decided to start with Microsoft and VMware. VMware obviously has done extraordinarily well in virtualization, but Microsoft has noticed and is responding. And by Microsoft bundling Hyper-V inside the Server 2012 edition they've just launched, they are making a real impact on the cost of virtualization, putting VMware under pricing pressure, particularly in emerging markets and new installations. They're not yet kicking out VMware, but they're putting VMware under virtualization pressure. And VMware, I think that this slide has hung, if someone can restart that slide. So VMware is responding, and VMware last year bought Nicira, a software-defined networking company. They've now responded by launching NSX, a software-defined networking standard that Juniper is behind, that HP is behind, and Dell is behind. But Cisco is not behind. And VMware and Cisco obviously had a close alliance, and now there's starting to be some tension in that relationship. Microsoft is also going after Cisco, particularly in the unified communication space with Skype and Link. And Cisco is so upset about this that they are protesting to the EU and appealing the decision for Microsoft to buy Skype, and that ruling's coming out soon. So you see Microsoft moving on to Cisco, VMware through software-defined networking moving on to Cisco. Cisco is responding itself. Very recently, Cisco acquired Whiptail, a flash storage company. We describe that as a little fingerprint into EMC in particular, their close partner up to now, as a little response probably to what VMware has been doing. And VMware itself is going after some of EMC's business with a software-defined data center strategy, taking intelligence out of the data center hardware into the software layer, into the virtual layer, and therefore putting pressure on margins inside storage. EMC is unique, and we have to give them great credit for their willingness to eat their own children, to avoid the innovator's dilemma, and to let one of their operations innovate, even though it may threaten the core business of the other. It's unique, EMC is doing pretty well, but also obviously quite challenging. Cisco, of course, made one of the biggest moves when it decided to go into the data center market. It jettisoned, or certainly damaged, long-term relationships that it had with IBM and HP, and has gone into blade data centers, and in the very large new build greenfield data center market are doing pretty well. And of course, HP, aware of what happened, has responded. And HP is putting more and more focus into the networking business, very aggressive pricing around switches, gaining market share, and also, as I've already mentioned, one of the biggest partners behind the VMware software-defined networking strategy, as a very clear move on Cisco. Oracle made a big move and tried to get into hardware and damaged its long-term relationship with HP as a result. Of all the moves I'm talking about, that's probably the only one that hasn't worked. And Oracle's hardware business, as some of you know who are long-term Sun partners, continues to decline quarter on quarter on quarter. But nevertheless, it was a restructure of their industry. And then perhaps the biggest one of all, Microsoft decided to launch Surfaces going into hardware. They've now decided to acquire Nokia, assuming it's approved, going into their own hardware and smartphones. As a result, Microsoft has put a stab in all its loyal PC OEMs that it's had for 2 decades. And they have to respond. And all of them are responding. And HP in particular has responded by launching tablets that ship on Android earlier on this year, by selling Chromebooks, and perhaps most interestingly of all, bundling Google Apps for business on one of their PC bundles and pushing Google Apps instead of Microsoft Office. We are seeing a dramatic tensioning increase inside the industry. And then there are some other vendors who've made yet less dramatic moves yet, but are still a part of the core business. Intel totally missed mobility. Unlike EMC, they weren't prepared to eat their own children. They chased performance rather than battery life and cost. They chased the wrong metric and have been hurt badly by the rise of ARM. The new management at Intel seems to have recognized that. They're leapfrogging mobility, trying to move into wearables, which I'll talk about in a minute, with the launch of the Quark processors. Intel will never get the same margins in the future that it's been used to. IBM making aggressive moves in cloud, security, in-memory databases and analytics, but has also been exposed by its underdeveloped mid-market business. too dependent on government, finance, and large companies around the world, and is now responding by trying to move into the mid-market, recently announcing that STG, its hardware division, will become 100% channel-friendly into the mid-market. Dell also totally missed mobile, but during the first half of this year launched a price war, gained market share in the run-up to privatization. Now the privatization, very long, very painful, has happened. We'd assume that would shift. The price war should end as they need to focus on cash flow and paying down debts. And we'll have to see how it moved. SAP blindsided Oracle by moving into in-memory databases, a radical transformation in the performance capability of databases with their SAP HANA solution. And now, as I mentioned, IBM's responding, Oracle's responding, but very clearly SAP has first mover advantage, as well as moving into cloud with a lot of acquisitions such as SuccessFactors. And Lenovo doing very well in the Wintel PC business and doing very well in the smartphone business in Asia, not here, but surely it needs to acquire because it's too exposed to the core PC business and diversify. And we'd look to see moves coming there. And we've got an interview with Gianfranco Lanci, who runs Lenovo in Europe later on today, and that will be one of the key questions we're asking him. So we see a dramatic restructuring, lots of tensions, and I've only highlighted some of them. I could have talked also about how Cisco is getting more friendly with Citrix as a result of some of the moves with VMware. We could go on, but the industry is starting to restructure. You need to be prepared for those moves and think about where you're positioned. Moving on, what are the key transitions that's happened in our industry? And it's extraordinary, is Amazon is changing the enterprise infrastructure industry. Amazon now has a dominant market share in the infrastructure as a service market. Their business this year will be about $3.8 billion, mainly in the US. The next 5 competitors to Amazon in that space will do about $2.4 billion together. Amazon's success in terms of revenue growth, 63% this year, has scared everybody. And therefore, we're seeing a lot of reactions to Amazon's move as a result of the fact that they've scared everybody. And now, as I talked about cloud, those of you who followed these presentations over the years, we told you to be cautious about cloud. We remain cautious about cloud. Amazon has proven that if it sells infrastructure as a service below cost, it can get customers. And it's losing money on this business. And we think everybody in the infrastructure and a service business is losing money. So Amazon's proven if you give things away, customers will come, especially in the US. They haven't proven that this is a profitable business or they can get a return on capital employed. But what they have done is created panic amongst all the industry titans. And so we've seen IBM go into the infrastructure and service business, HP, Microsoft, of course, with Azure, Google Compute Engine, and then most perhaps surprisingly of all, VMware going into the infrastructure as a service business itself with the vCloud hybrid service. Guys from VMware, if you're going to move into their sort of marketing world and compete with Amazon, you need a better name than vCloud hybrid service to sell infrastructure as a service. Now, why has VMware gone into this business? Because they feel there's a risk that Amazon is going to become so dominant, and all the cloud service providers that work with VMware are moving too slowly. Particularly the telcos are moving too slowly. So it's created panic and change in the industry. VMware going into this business ourselves. The cloud service providers themselves, who are not making money, are going through a dramatic change. The way they run their businesses is changing. Components are becoming commoditized. They're moving to open source software. They're moving to software-defined storage networking, taking cost out. There is a devastating cost curve going on in cloud service providers today. The cloud that was built 2 years ago is very expensive to compare with the cloud built today. And that, again, is making the economics of this business very difficult. Already this year, there have been 2 notable bankruptcies in the cloud service provider market. 2E2 in the UK and Novanix very recently in the United States. Just putting a sign on their website, sorry, we can't run our business anymore. You need to move your data somewhere else, hopefully quickly. And IBM is now helping that transition to help those customers. This infrastructure as a service business is fast growth. It's not profitable. Nobody is making money. Some companies are now trying to rise up the stack, not competing at the commodity end of the business where it's too difficult, rise up the stack in ways like launching community clouds, where you work with a group of companies in the finance industry or the legal industry. EMC has done some of this. And all those companies in the one sector and one country who have the same regulation and compliance requirements pull together to use one cloud and lock into that cloud provider. That it could be an attractive business. Some signs of success there. And also we're seeing the cloud service providers try and partner with software as a service companies and lock in customers through software as a service rather than infrastructure as a service. And then having quickly gone through the impact Amazon's had, there is a piece of good news now for the channel. And for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to talk about good news for the channel. Cloud service providers have discovered they cannot sell direct. And what we're seeing is a whole host of cloud service providers, including Equinix, Colt, Rackspace, now start to build channel programs because they need you to reach customers. They've got too much capacity. Money making is very difficult. They need the channel. That's a really strong news, and you will have lots of choices of who to partner, but try and pick one that isn't going to go bankrupt. Not an easy challenge. The software as a service market also remains strong in terms of growth. Salesforce.com in particular, driving fast, but lots of other opportunities. But again, remember, they're growing about 30%, and despite the absolutely brilliant marketing they do, Salesforce.com is not profitable. Continues to lose money, as again, does almost anyone in the software as a service market. Again, what's been proven is that customers like the agility, the speed of change. A software as a service provision, as we said in our video, you might see the software upgraded every month, every 2 months. In the old world, with installations on premise, that was every 2 years and very painful transition, lots of consultants, etc. So the market is growing, but we haven't yet shown how we make money from this. And then I said I would talk about politics in this presentation. And very early on in my career, and many, many years ago, one of my bosses at the time said, Steve, when you go on stage, the one thing never to do is talk about politics. You can't please everyone. You're going to upset someone. Don't talk about politics. And for the last 20 years, politics hasn't mattered to our industry. Suddenly, politics matters a huge amount to our industry, and the impact of regulation and government decisions is shaping our industry. We surveyed you a few weeks ago via Candafero, asking about the NSA revelations and PRISM. And one of the surprising things was around 20% of you didn't know what NSA and PRISM was all about. So in 2 or 3 sentences, I'll try and explain it. There's a guy called Edward Snowden who had access to classified documents, has leaked documents, and through those documents has made allegations, not proven, but no one's really challenged that they're unproven either, that the major software companies are systematically providing data to the US government and other governments as well, but let's focus on the US. Clouds have become unsafe. There is snooping systematically going on. But he's also alleged that even hardware has been built. Some of the VPNs have been built with deliberate vulnerabilities in cooperation with the NSA to allow governments to access on-premise equipment. So it doesn't necessarily ensure that on-premise equipment is totally secure either. Managing data has become a huge responsibility, and it's a huge opportunity for all of you. Now these revelations have come out, and it's a good news message for all of you. We expect to see 3 changes as a result of these revelations. And by the way, even if it was untrue what Edward Snowden has alleged, the very fact that it might be true is important to you. Because as you provide infrastructure to your customers, you have a duty of responsibility to make them secure, and they have a duty of responsibility to their customers to keep their customers' information secure. So even if it's not true, but it probably is true, even if it's not true, it's a huge impact. We see 3 responses. The first one will be a change in how some web services work and how encryption technologies work. There is a company called Lockbox that encrypts data on somebody's PC before uploading it to the cloud and keeps it encrypted so that even if they provide information over to the NSA cannot encrypt it. That might work, or maybe they'll crack it. That might work. There's a search engine called DuckDuckGo that promises not to track your activity. And the search engine is booming. It's a small startup, it's doing very well. It doesn't track your activity. So even if they have to disclose what's happening on their servers, they have no information to disclose. So those are some of the things that might happen. We also think this should drive, and it's a good news message for IBM and HP, the adoption of open source software. Because if software in the cloud is open source, nobody owns it, nobody can be asked to provide it onto the NSA, and even if the encryption's broken and backdoors are put into the software, everyone would know about it because it's open source. So we see that this move should enable the open source movement as a way of protecting the infrastructure. But we think the most important trend is this will drive go local. We expect more and more companies to insist their data stays in their country. And that's a big opportunity for you to either provide those data services or resell those data services. All credit to Deutsche Telekom in Germany, moving very quickly on this issue. They have, since these revelations, launched a new service, a new email service made in Germany, where they guarantee that an email sent from one Deutsche Telekom account to another does not pass through the US and cannot be accessed by the US. Germany, we expect to take a lead around the world in this issue because of all the history and their fear of tracking around what came from the Stasi and the East Germany originally. So Germany is leading. Deutsche Telekom has already enabled that as an email service. We expect the same kind of solutions to come in the cloud. Brazil is the other country that's really driving hard on this. And Brazil is, they're discussing moving into regulation that will say any multinational company providing internet services in Brazil must have the data stored in Brazil. And if they don't have a data center in Brazil, they won't be able to operate. And then the American company is going to be in an interesting position, the Google and Amazons of the world. Do they build a data center in Brazil, or do they withdraw from the market? And remember, Google has already had to withdraw from China, effectively withdraw from China. So we're going to see some restructuring and the creation of local companies. But remember, I also mentioned there's some issues around hardware and what's been allowed inside hardware because of the NSA. And you remember 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, when you used to use a telephone to plug into your France Telecom network or your Deutsche Telekom network, you had to buy a phone from Deutsche Telekom or France Telecom that was certified by them. We think it's quite possible that some countries, and Germany will take the lead, will only allow equipment to be sold if it's certified, approved in Germany by TÜV or some other organization. And then the multinational companies selling hardware will have to go through a certification process in Germany that complies with German law. And again, that will be complicated for the multinationals. It may even create an opportunity for some local European companies to lead in that space. So companies like StoneSoft in Finland are suddenly getting a lot of attention because of the fact that they're European in terms of the security space. So very complicated subject, but the three drivers we expect to see as a response to this are all good news for you. Better encryption, open source, and go local, certify in the country you're operating in. And now I want to talk about the biggest transition of all. Every company is a software company. You have to be software companies. Every company has to be software companies. And let me try to explain why. What this slide is trying to communicate is we see software in three broad areas. Software in the operations space that keeps your company moving. That's been around for a long time. That's the licensing business. It's the business you know typically. It's been lucrative for you, but it's relatively flat and relatively stable. That business will continue, but that's not where it's exciting. We expect more exciting innovation, and is coming, in product differentiation. We will differentiate our conference by having the best app in the world, hopefully. Software-defined innovation. And we're going to see lots of companies redefine their businesses with software. And I'm going to give you some examples which are quite fun. Some simple ones to start with. Federal Express, Postal Service, now offer a premium service called SenseAware, where they put a GPS monitor inside a package. You pay a premium, And what that GPS monitor does is monitor in real time the temperature of the package, the location of the package, the humidity of the package, and reports that back in real time through sensors, the Internet of Everything. It's very powerful in the food industry. They can guarantee how their food has been transported. It's very powerful in the medical industry, where medicines need to be highly regulated. It's a software-defined innovation in the postal service. One of our sponsors today, Schneider Electric, has run a worldwide campaign. Many of you have seen it in Business Week and the like, where they say, if you use our software, you will save energy. Software tools to save energy, a powerful message. Software redefining their products. In customs, as we go through different airports and customs, we are moving, thankfully, to e-passports, iris scanners, e-passports. That is software replacing customs agents. We said last year apps are replacing people, and they absolutely are. But the biggest example I want to give you today on how software is revolutionizing industry comes from the US. It comes from California, of course. It's the Tesla S car. It's a software-defined car. It has become, in the year of its launch, the third best-selling luxury sedan in California. It's an electric car with a range of about 250 miles. I think it's Android-powered, and it's software-based. I'll just give you one example of why Tesla is so far ahead of everybody else. Recently, they did an update overnight, because every car has a SIM card in, so you can update over 3G or 4G. They did an upgrade overnight, and they gave all their customers 10% more range on the car, just with a software update, because they enabled sleep, a better sleep function inside the car. I think you'll find, and it's not my area of expertise, the car industry, I think you'll find that Volkswagen, Renault, BMW, Toyota, and all the rest are going to be blindsided in the car industry, just like Nokia was in phones or Kodak was in photography. It's coming much faster than they realize. Their challenge will be to innovate fast enough. And what we've seen is most often these large old companies are unable to move quickly enough. Look for a revolution in the car industry. Look for a revolution everywhere where software allows innovation and product differentiation. Software companies have a big advantage over anybody else. In the old world, by the way, it's not good for our business. In the old world, you did market research to know what your customers think. In the software-defined world, you can see how people are using your software. You can do what's called A/B testing. We try this and we try this, we see which customers prefer, and you know virtually in real time what they think, and you're able to innovate and change as a result of that testing. So A/B testing in software replacing market research. It's a huge transition. And then you and we have to help all our customers on this digital transformation. Who is the digital expert in your company? For the CEOs out there, it should be you. It should be you. And if it's not you, you have a problem. I was recently in a meeting, I won't say who, and he's not in the room, where I met a guy. He was talking about our event, and he said, "Can you see the attendee list?" And I said, "Sure, log on." And he said, "I don't want to log on. Can you send it to me, print it for me?" I think if you can't log on, he's not going to lead a digital transformation, that guy. And each of you need to keep your skills up to date. What we're seeing, again, a trend in the US, because the CEOs are often less interested in technology, maybe a bit older and less interested in technology, don't want to keep up. We're seeing a trend towards chief digital officers, reporting to the CEO, responsible for driving change inside an organization that drives software change, inside product differentiation, inside marketing, and inside the operations, looking across the whole operation. These employees are difficult to find. And then what we discover is something else very interesting. The trend is to try and look for spiky employees. When you were growing up and when I was growing up, we thought if you wanted to lead a company, you should spend time in HR, legal, sales, marketing, operations. And once you've built out a broad set of skills, then you are qualified to lead a big company. There is now a body of opinion that digital is so important that your product leader needs to be spiky, highly skilled in understanding how software impacts your company, more important than everybody else. And obviously, the top spiky employee of all time was Steve Jobs, certainly not a corporate manager. But then you look at what Mark Zuckerberg's done at Facebook. Those two have founded their company. But Marissa Mayer at Yahoo, not a broad-based CEO, but a highly specialized product person trying to revive Yahoo and making a very good start, I have to say. Apple, of course, have replaced Steve Jobs with a consensus manager. And he's surrounded by spikes, though, particularly Johnny Ive. We'll have to see how that goes. So far, maybe not quite so well, but we'll see. And a big question from an HR point of view is, will Microsoft go spiky when they replace Steve Ballmer? Do they go for a technology leader, or do they go for a business person who can cut costs and manage a P&L? Huge decision. We know that that's been discussed at board level inside Microsoft. We'll have to see. And marketing is digital everywhere. You need and your customers need to manage their online presence 24 hours a day, 7 days a week across all the platforms that are out there. Recently, there was a nice little example where we all have problems with the airlines from time to time. But one guy was very clever. British Airways lost his baggage. And he wasn't very happy with how they treated him. He wasn't very happy with how they were going to find his baggage. He got frustrated. So what he did is he bought a promoted tweet. He paid for a promoted tweet, cost a few $100s, targeted, I think, New York at night, and it went viral. Now, British Airways does customer service by telephone. They only operate in European hours from 9 in the morning till 6 at night, or whatever it is. So this went on all night without British Airways being aware of what happened. You could be sure the next morning he got his baggage. But they need to become a digital company. They weren't. The old world no longer applies. He was very clever. It's an example of change. Marketing is everywhere. And again, this is opportunity for you because your traditional suppliers are going into online marketing. So recently, Adobe bought Neolane, an online marketing company. Salesforce has bought ExactTarget. And then I mentioned the 2E2 bankruptcy earlier. One of the reasons it was interesting is some of their assets went to an advertising agency who was trying to beef up its digital skills. So look at how you can use marketing, but make sure you have those skills. And inside your companies, start thinking about how you promote spiky employees. And one of the things that's enabled spiky employees is the way communications changed. Think of how many communication methods we no longer use. We don't send faxes. We don't almost ever write letters. Voicemail is out of date. You now don't telephone someone without an appointment. It's probably considered rude to do so, unless they're a very good friend. SMS is being replaced by over-the-top services, and telepresence, unfortunately, has been impacted by the availability of mobile-free video services. The room-based telepresence market, for example, declined 34% in 2012, and we're predicting will decline another 13% this year. That's the large mega systems. It's partly the economy, but it's also the mobile change. Now, there's a few interesting things about this. What do you notice between the slide in black and the colored logos on top? The old forms of communication were generic, not owned by anybody, a process, an industry standard, as you speak. All the new forms of communication are owned by companies. We've gone from a generic standard to company-owned. And given what I've already talked about in terms of the NSA and PRISM regulations, that's quite a worrying trend. All owned by people. They're no longer generic standards. Last night at dinner, I was very happy to speak to Milo Shaha from Cisco. And he told me something interesting and something I totally agree with for all my colleagues in the room. He said, I will not respond to internal email. They just get, I think, an auto reply saying, if you send me an internal email, I will not respond. He still has to respond to customer email. Atos Origin, the French IT services company, their CEO has promised to be a zero email company by 2014 internally. Again, they'll still have to do external email for a while because of the change in the way communication works. And going back to our spiky employees are enabled by these new forms of communication. They can hide, they can work at funny times of the day, they don't have to get dressed, they don't have to look good, and they can communicate by instant messenger, whatever they do, 24 hours a day. It works for spiky employees. But it's a revolution, so think about how you can reduce email dependency in your company and become more efficient. One of the most exciting trends in our industry today is the transition to what we call accessories, wearable computing. It's early stages. Some of the innovations today are not yet ready for market because battery life is not good, because the software is not good. But we are absolutely sure this is going to create a revolution in several industries. And where it will start is in health, wellness, and fitness. Health, wellness, and fitness. And if you have any doubt about why wearable computing will take off, I'm going to describe it to you now. So what we mean by accessories is small computing devices, probably connected by Bluetooth. And there was a new release of Bluetooth ratified this year, Bluetooth 4.0 or Bluetooth Low Energy, that connects to your smartphone or your tablet or your PC, but most often smartphone or tablet. And you can control and interact with that accessory, that wearable device, via the app. Now, if I want to give you one example where this will absolutely work, and there's a startup already working on this in the US, it's a dream for parents everywhere. Next year, a wearable device will launch for babies. And that means you'll be able to put your baby to bed at night. It will tell you whether they're sleeping or not. It will tell you their temperature, whether they're lying upside down or not. It will give you voice so you can hear if they're quiet. And all those new mothers and fathers who are worried and checking on their babies all night suddenly will have all that information on their app. Every middle-class and wealthy family in the world will buy one, surely. It's an absolute winner. I know there are primitive non-app-based solutions, but this app, you can be anywhere in the world and see how your baby is performing. That will be a winner. You reminded me. What I don't know is whether the app. What I don't know is whether the app will have a stop crying button. We'll have to see whether they can develop that. Maybe not in version 1, but maybe by version 3. And then you see other examples. Obviously, any patients or elderly with serious illnesses can be permanently monitored. So you know whether your elderly parents have got out of bed in the mornings, that all these information will be flowing to you. We'll see a revolution in home monitoring around heating and surveillance, all of it controlled by an app. SureTel, one of our sponsors, has developed a new office-based telephony system called the SureTel Dock, where you can dock your iPhone in their dock, and your iPhone then becomes your business desk-based phone. And that's a B2B accessory already shipping today. Now, the problem with my next example is everything I've said to you up to now will be forgotten when I describe our next example. Because I said I was going to talk to you about politics and sex. Some of you will know Nike has done very well with its fuel band, becoming digital. The other company who's going down that path is none other than Durex. And I think next year, maybe even this year, one of my colleagues were more up to date on this than I am, they're launching a new product line called Funderwear. It's app-controlled underwear that vibrates. Underwear that vibrates. So you can use your phone to vibrate your underwear, or maybe your partner's phone. The IT industry is converging with the sex industry. Now, who would have thought of that? And by the way, that's the example I thought I could share on stage. If you do a bit of Googling, you'll discover there's a lot more innovation at the edgier end of that industry. Software going everywhere. Every company becoming a software company. You need to have those software skills to build product differentiation and do marketing. And that example really does crystallize what's going on. The thing that this will drive is creation of huge amounts of data and huge amounts of networking traffic. So even if these are consumer-led devices, We are going to see a revolution in the amount of data collected. We are seeing a revolution in the amount of data collected. There's lots of acquisitions going along. And after the hype of big data, we're now seeing the real understanding of analytics going on. There have been a lot of mistakes in the early big data projects. One telco was laughing with me recently about how they sold all their data to a company for around $20 million. But because of the regulation and how they collect their data, there was so little content in there, they just couldn't believe anyone would get any value from it. It was a joke inside their company because someone thought, if I have a lot of data, it would be useful. Having a lot of data is not very useful unless you know what to do with it. And the mistakes made with data are, the data's not good enough, the quality is not there. For example, there's too many abbreviations, and when you do the searches, you don't pick up all the abbreviations of data. There is a chronic lack of expertise in analytics. Not many people are good at this. You need very spiky employees. And the other mistakes are people use wrong data. For example, if you're trying to prove your internal operations, your Twitter feed may not be very useful for that data. The biggest problems in analytics, though, are the next two, is that companies are initiating big data projects without knowing what they're doing. And if you put a big data project in IT, far divorced from the business operations, they don't know what they're doing. It's not enough to set them off in a direction and see what you can find. So setting business objectives, knowing what question you're going to ask is absolutely critical. But the biggest problem of analytics so far is humans. We all suffer from something called confirmation bias. We look out for data that we agree with, and then we use it. If data we don't agree with appears, we don't use it. And getting human beings to ignore that inside themselves is very, very challenging. Even highly trained professors of statistics consistently make basic errors on confirmation bias. This is why if you're left-wing, you read a left-wing newspaper. If you're right-wing, you read a right-wing newspaper because you agree with it. And there are lots of examples which I can't go into today, but it's a really difficult problem. You need highly bright, highly well-trained employees to counter confirmation bias. You can't believe exactly what comes out. And then finally, running through quickly, I want to return to hardware. Yes, hardware does have a future, and one of you in this room, at least one of you, is going to make more than €1 million by moving on this next trend. The move to 3D printing has started. The 3D printing market will double this year compared with last year. On this slide, you see some of the things that have been printed already, whether guns, human body parts, replacement human body parts, women's clothing, that's printed on a 3D printer, women's shoes, sunglasses, and even moving into food and organic products. It's in the early stages. There is some overhype. The market leaders today are small companies you haven't heard of. Stratasys, which bought MakerBot, 3D Systems. You need software, because you need to design these products. The best launches on Kickstarter in the US, the best money-raising activities this year are all on 3D printing. Around scanners, because you need to scan objects. Around pens, so you can draw in 3D. And around the printers themselves. Microsoft is putting 3D printing support into Windows 8.1, which is just about to ship. This is a wonderful channel business. You need to sell 3D printers. You need to install them. You need to connect them to the network. You need to manage the software, and you need to print, and you need to sell the consumables. Start now. Get that expertise now. You're not going to make your million in 1 year, but in 5 to 10 years, becoming the lead 3D printer experts in your country will be a tremendous opportunity. You will see more of me through the rest of this conference at various times, but that brings me to the end of my formal presentation. Thank you all for coming, and I'm handing back to Rachel. Thank you, Rachel.